Hey guys, it's me, Cyrus. Welcome back. Today we're going to continue our journey talking about the evolution of the Sega Genesis. So they had released a Sega CD, a couple different models. They had released an SVP enhancement chip and were able to bring Virtua Racing home. The next step was to try to figure out how to make the Genesis capable of doing even more. So they came up with this idea called the 32X. This was actually pretty much a direct response to the Atari Jaguar. The Atari Jaguar had Sega a little bit bothered, and they were trying to figure out how to compete with that in the immediacy and give the Genesis a little bit more life before the Sega Saturn. So they came up with this idea to bring out another add-on for the Sega Genesis. And the 32X was the answer they came up with. The 32X is fascinating because it obviously goes straight into the Sega Genesis. It'll work on the Model 1, the Model 2. There's certain Genesis models that it doesn't really work on, but it does work on those. And it lets you play all of your Genesis games and the new 32X games, which are enhanced in a lot of ways. Now, it's still using the hardware of the Genesis. It's still using that. But it's adding a whole new layer of extremely high color polygonal graphics. Graphics that are running off two Hitachi CPUs, 32-bit CPUs. This thing is pretty cool. And it could do a whole lot of stuff that you just could not do on the Genesis. There were games that were released that really showed off a whole nother level of gameplay and possibility for this aging console. Remember, the Genesis had been around since 1989. And here it is, doing things that it really shouldn't be doing. And of course, this, like I said, was released to compete with the Jaguar and the 3DO. And it was received kind of lukewarm because people didn't really know what to make of it, because most people were waiting for the next gen consoles, the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. And this seemed to be muddying that water. This seemed to be an unnecessary stopgap that was sort of out of place and out of time. It could do some really cool stuff though. It could do the superscalar games like Afterburner, and it could do them in a far better way than had ever been done up to this point. 30 frames per second, high speed, full scaling, everything. The arcade experience at home. Later on, when the Saturn came out, they would do this at 60 frames per second, but at this time, this was amazing. This was the pinnacle of what was possible for that type of technology. But like I said before, the 32X could do a lot more than just that. The 32X could add polygons, and a lot of them. It could push polygons way better than the SVP chip could. It could do all kinds of stuff. This thing had two of those Hitachi chips running at 23 megahertz each. That's a considerable upgrade. This thing could do 32,000 colors on the screen. And the Genesis always had problems with its color palette. But this took things, as you can see, to that next level, the next level of graphical fidelity. So it was very impressive. But it was strange. It cost $150 when it came out, and there wasn't a whole lot of games. There never was a whole lot of games for the 32X. But the games that came out had some definite gems. There were some definite bangers in that list of games. And we're looking at a few of them here. A really great version of Space Harrier, and Virtua Fighter brought home. So Virtua Racing, you saw the new enhanced 32X version of Virtua Racing Deluxe, and they were also able to bring Virtua Fighter to the 32X and give you a really nice experience for a fighting game on your home console. And this was designed to compete with the Jaguar, but I'll tell you, the Jag didn't have anything like this. And the 32X was way more impressive than I realized, because at the time, I owned a Jaguar. I was all about the Jag. I was very happy with it. The 3DO was this rich man's fantasy that I could never have. So I didn't even bother really worrying about the 3DO. The CDI was full motion video and weird stuff, and I was like, whatever. The 32X to me just seemed like, I was like, 32X, whatever, I've got a 64-bit Jaguar. So it wasn't until years and years later that I finally got some experience playing the 32X, and I'll tell you, it was pretty impressive. I mean, no, the library's not huge, but the enhancements that this thing brought to so many games, even 2D fighting games like Mortal Kombat 2, really was impressive. This is a really great version of Mortal Kombat 2. And that's sort of a theme that you see over and over repeating itself with this console. Not a big library, and not every game is amazing, but there are some great experiences to be had here, and so much potential. We found out later that there was a lot of games that were in the works to be released that just, they never made it to the market. There was actually an X-Men game that looked like it was actually going to be pretty cool. There was a Pinocchio game, and there was, I know you might be thinking, Pinocchio? That's kind of weird. Well, yeah, the reason I bring that up is because there's actually a unfinished version of that that's out there that has been sort of made available for you to play. If you want to find it and download it, you can try it for yourself. It's pretty cool. So there was a lot of games that came out, and then even more that were in the works, some of which got turned into Sega Saturn games, and some of which just kind of turned into nothing. But, you know, the Jaguar had some games that went head-to-head with what the 32X had to offer here. Like Metalhead here, which is actually a pretty cool mech game. You can compare this to maybe Iron Soldier, and it's up to you to decide which one you think is better. I think Metalhead's pretty cool. It has texture mapping. It's pretty awesome. I would probably say I prefer Iron Soldier, but, you know, I'm a Jaguar fan. But I'm a 32X fan also, because I do think this is a pretty cool system. And the exclusive titles that were released, like Metalhead and like some of these other games that were only available and only released on the 32X, really did make it an interesting buy. It made it something that was compelling in some ways, because it was only $150. So there was some interest in this. It sold about 800,000 units, which is, I mean, that's not a whole lot, but considering that this had a lifespan of about 2 years, and of that 2 years, really only a few months were actually productive, I think that's pretty good sales, all things considered. And that low price point did help. Plus, you had games like this. If you're a Star Wars fanatic at that time, and you had been playing the Star Wars arcade game, the idea of having this at home, having the Star Wars arcade game brought home, and have it look pretty dang good, and play pretty dang good, was hard to resist. So there's a lot of people, I think, that bought the 32X for some of these exclusive experiences that you just couldn't get anywhere else. They just never got released anywhere else. And it is funny to me that Star Wars Arcade never got released on the Saturn, never got released on the PlayStation or the N64. This is it. There were some other Star Wars games, obviously, that got released, but not this one. This was your single attempt to play that. And there were some other games that weren't licensed games, that were exclusive, that really showed off the potential of what the 32X had to offer, just how many polygons this thing could push, and how it could look if they really spent some time putting together a good game like Shadow Squadron. This is a fantastic space shooter. If you like these types of games like Colony Wars or Wing Commander, that sort of thing, then you really should check out this game, because it is fantastic and it controls really well with just the standard Genesis 6-button controller. Yeah, definitely worth checking out. Definitely another reason why I felt like this was a system that I got and I didn't regret getting. I have actually very much enjoyed having a 32X. And I love the Sega Saturn. So, was this necessary? Was this console, if you want to call it a console, was this add-on for the Genesis necessary? No, I don't think so. But it is fascinating that they decided to go ahead and do this, because they felt so, I guess, intimidated by the release of the Atari Jaguar. They actually were concerned about that. I mean, nobody knew what was going to happen at the time, and there was some concern that Atari might have something that could be a hit. But the 32X had some power. It could do texture map polygons. It could do light sourcing. It could do a bunch of really cool effects. This was not low spec crap hardware. This was really impressive for the time. In fact, on the Jaguar, you would be hard pressed to find something that looked like this right here. There was just some really cool, unique experiences here. So, pretty awesome stuff all the way around. I will say that there was some debate at the time amongst the heads of Sega, the US and the Japanese branches of Sega, as to what should be done, whether they should release this console, whether they should not release this, if it should be sort of a standalone thing, or if it should be an add-on for the Genesis. There was some debate. They had a lot of problems at Sega, a lot of dissent amongst the ranks, and that confusion led to a pretty ham-handed launch for the Sega Saturn in 1995. But in 1994, this was what Sega was doing. They were trying to extend the life of the Sega Genesis one more year with something that they felt like was a compelling product that would add something really special to the Genesis. They even had Doom. Now, most people that look at a game like Doom on the 32X, they say, well, it's better than the Super Nintendo version, right? It's not nearly as good as the Atari Jaguar version, but it was actually still pretty cool. It ran pretty well. The music was not the best. The game was okay. It could have been a lot better. The frame rate could have been better. It wasn't full screen. There were some things holding it back, and that was because this was a pretty rushed port of Doom. Could have been a lot better. But what's really fascinating is there's a bunch of people that have gone back and done a bunch of really cool stuff with homebrew and releasing demos and all kinds of stuff for the 32X, including a new version of Doom, believe it or not. A new version that supports the Sega CD audio, if you put in an audio CD, and considerably beefs up what the game can look like and how it can run. And that's what you're looking at right here. This is Doom Resurrection. This is a game that you can download and you can play on real hardware, which is what I'm doing right here. And if you have an EverDrive, you can actually play this on your Genesis. You can play this on an emulator as well, but it's just really fascinating that there are people out there that have cared about this hardware enough to try to go fix something that they felt like could have been a lot better experience, like Doom. And I think this is actually a really solid version of Doom. This is actually a really cool way to play this game on an old CRT monitor using a Genesis controller. It's just pretty amazing. It's pretty hard to believe that it's real, but it is. So I think the 32X is a console or an add-on for the Genesis in a way that has been misunderstood over the years. There's been a lot of people that just didn't understand what the purpose of this was, why you would have such a thing, what the benefit would be of even buying something like this or even playing games on something like this. And I think it's definitely worth having. I think the games that it does offer are actually really cool. Now, there was, like I said, this discussion at Sega about whether or not this should be an add-on or standalone console. And there was a mock-up shown for a standalone version of the 32X, believe it or not. And it's they have one of these at the Video Game Museum in Frisco, Texas, that I have been to a couple of times. And here's a picture that I took of that actual mock-up console. Now, it's just a shell. There's no electronics or anything inside. But this is what they showed at several different trade shows back in the day as potentially a consoleized 32X all-in-one system. And I think they were talking about possibly selling this for about $200. But it didn't ever come to it. They didn't ever do that. They went ahead and just completely moved on to the Sega Saturn. But I don't know. It would have been pretty fascinating, I think. It would have been pretty interesting. And, I don't know. I might have ended up buying one of those because it's pretty cool. It's unfortunate that the Sega Saturn was not backwards compatible with the Sega CD, the 32X, and the Genesis, because if the Saturn had been backwards compatible with Sega's earlier products, I think they really could have solidified a foothold in the next gen. And unfortunately, they struggled against the PlayStation and the Nintendo 64. And that's terrible, especially in North America. In Japan, the Saturn did a lot better. But in the United States and in North America, it was a struggle. And if you know anything about the Sega Saturn, what a library of games. What an amazing console that actually is. A lot of us in the United States had no idea just how badass the Sega Saturn would turn out to be, because we didn't get most of the great games. Most of the best games for the Saturn never made it to the United States. So in the next video, we're going to take a look at the Sega Saturn. We're going to take a look at what happened past the Genesis. When the Genesis and the Mega Drive, whatever you want to call it, finally lived its life, the 32X didn't really live up to expectations, and Sega decided to go ahead and move on to their next generation. What was that like? How was it received? How did it come out the gate? What kind of games were offered? And what amazing titles never made it out of Japan? At least, not right away. Check back with me soon. The next video will be coming, and we'll be talking about one of my all-time favorite video game consoles. One of the best consoles ever made. Some people think it is the best console ever made, and that is the Sega Saturn. Check back with me soon. I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you for watching this. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your time. And I will talk to you later. Take care.